40 years on the bench. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that power doesn't just corrupt, it makes people stupid. It gives them this warped sense of security, a belief that the rules they expect everyone else to follow simply don't apply to them or their family. I walked into my courtroom this morning, the black robe heavy on my shoulders, and I could already smell the entitlement wafting off the woman standing at the defense table. Her name was Brenda Miller. She sat there with her chin tilted just a little too high, wearing a suit that cost more than a month's rent for most people, and a look on her face that said she'd rather be anywhere else but here. She thought she was the queen of the county because her husband, David Miller, wore a chief's badge. I took my seat, adjusted my lace collar, and didn't even look at her yet. I looked at the file. Then I looked at the plaintiff. Her name was Sarah Jenkins. She was 22, pale and very visibly pregnant. She looked like she hadn't slept since the day the world ended, which, for her, was probably 3 months ago when her fiancé Brenda's son was killed in a car accident. Sarah was shaking. Not the kind of shaking you do when you're cold, but the kind you do when you're terrified of the person across the room. "Bird, let's get started," I said, my voice cutting through the hushed murmurs of the gallery like a hot knife through butter. I didn't need to yell. I never need to yell when I have the truth on my side. I opened the folder and leaned forward. "All right, let's get the basics down. Miss Jenkins, you are suing Mrs. Miller for $5,000, the statutory maximum for assault, battery, and emotional distress. You claim that on the afternoon of July 14th, the defendant came to your apartment, forced her way in, and physically struck you. You also claim she threatened to use her husband's position to have you arrested if you reported it. Is that correct?" Sarah cleared her throat, her voice small but steady. "Yes, Your Honor." And Mrs. Miller, I turned my gaze to the woman in the expensive suit. She didn't flinch. She gave me a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You filed a countersuit for harassment and defamation. You claim you were never at the apartment and that this is a shakedown because you cut her off financially after your son's death. Is that your story?" "It's not a story," Judge Brenda Miller said, her tone dripping with a condescending sweetness that made my teeth ache. "It's the truth. This girl has been obsessed with our family since Marcus passed. She's looking for a payday, and she's using a tragic situation to get it. My husband is a respected member of law enforcement. We don't behave like—" "Stop right there," I snapped, raising a hand. "I don't care who your husband is. Unless he was standing in the living room with a video camera when this happened, his title is irrelevant in this room. In this room, the only chief is me. Do we understand each other?" Brenda's smile faltered. "Of course, Judge." "Good. Don't use your husband's badge as a shield. It's tacky, and it doesn't work on me." I turned back to Sarah. "Miss Jenkins, tell me what happened on July 14th. And don't give me a novel, just the facts." Sarah took a deep breath. "Marcus died in May. We were supposed to be married in June. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks before the accident. Marcus was thrilled. His parents, they weren't. Brenda told me from the start that I wasn't socially compatible with their family. After the funeral, she told me to leave town. She offered me $10,000 to disappear and, in her words, deal with the problem." "By problem, she meant the baby?" I asked. "Yes, Your Honor." I refused. I told her this was Marcus's child, her grandchild. She told me Marcus was a golden boy with a bright future and she wouldn't have his legacy tarnished by a girl like me. Sarah's voice trembled. "On the 14th, she showed up at my door. She didn't knock. She had a key that she must have taken from Marcus's things. She started screaming that I was a parasite. She said I was trying to trap them. When I tried to call my mother, she grabbed my arm, spun me around, and slapped me so hard I fell against the kitchen counter." I watched Brenda Miller as Sarah spoke. Most people, when accused of hitting a pregnant woman, show a flicker of shame or at least a standard defensive posture. Brenda just looked bored. She was checking her manicure. "And then what?" I prompted Sarah. "I was on the floor, holding my stomach," Sarah said. a tear finally escaping. I told her I was calling the police. She laughed. She literally laughed in my face. She said, "Go ahead. Call them. Who do you think is going to answer the radio?" My husband's officers? They know who signs their checks, Sarah. You'll be in a cell before the sun goes down for filing a false report. Then she kicked my phone under the fridge and left. I looked at the medical records Sarah had submitted. A bruised cheek, a minor contusion on the hip, redness on the arm. The dates matched. The police report, however, was a different story. It was a one-page document signed by a Sergeant Vance stating that the complainant appeared distraught and confused and that no evidence of a struggle was found. It concluded that no charges would be filed due to a lack of witnesses. "Mrs. Miller," I said, leaning back, "where were you on the 14th at 2 p.m.? "I was at the country club, Judge, having lunch with the mayor's wife," Brenda replied smoothly. "I have at least 3 people who can testify to that." "I don't want 3 people. I want 1 piece of paper," I said. "Did you bring a receipt, a credit card statement, anything that isn't a friend lying for you?" I didn't think I needed to prove my whereabouts against the word of a person like this, Brenda said, gesturing vaguely at Sarah. "A person like this?" I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. That's usually the warning sign for anyone with a brain to stop talking. Brenda didn't have the memo. "You mean a pregnant woman who was carrying your son's child?" "You mean a grieving fiancé? What exactly is a person like this in your world, Mrs. Miller?" "Someone who doesn't belong," Brenda said, her composure cracking just enough to show the ugly elitism underneath. "She's a waitress, Judge. My son was a law student. She was a fling that got out of hand, and now she's trying to extort us because she knows David has a reputation to uphold." "If your husband has a reputation to uphold, he should start by making sure his officers actually investigate crimes instead of burying them for his wife," I said. I looked at the police report again. "Bird, look at this. Sergeant Vance. Do we know a Sergeant Vance?" Bird leaned in, looking at the name. "He's the chief's administrative assistant, Judge. He doesn't usually handle patrol calls." I felt the familiar heat of indignation rising in my chest. "Oh, isn't that convenient? A sergeant who works directly for the husband just happens to be the one who responds to a domestic assault call involving the wife, and he finds no evidence?" "Was the bruise on her face not evidence, Mrs. Miller? Or did you think it was just makeup?" "She probably did it herself," Brenda scoffed. "She's desperate." I looked at Sarah. "Miss Jenkins, did you take any photos that day, other than the ones in the medical report?" "I did, Your Honor," Sarah said. She reached into her folder and pulled out a stack of printouts. "But I also have something else. My apartment has a doorbell camera. I didn't tell the sergeant about it because he was being so mean to me, I was scared he'd take the footage and delete it. I waited until I could get it onto a thumb drive and give it to my lawyer." The air in the room changed. Brenda Miller's posture shifted. For the first time, she didn't look bored. She looked like she just stepped onto thin ice and heard a crack. "A doorbell camera?" I said, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "I love technology. It makes it so much harder for liars to breathe. Bird, let's see what's on that drive." I watched the monitor. The video was clear. It showed Brenda Miller, dressed in the same expensive suit she claimed to be wearing at the country club, standing at Sarah's door. She wasn't knocking. She was fumbling with a key. She looked angry, no. She looked feral. She pushed the door open and disappeared inside. 3 minutes later, the audio picked up a sharp crack, the sound of a hand hitting a face, followed by Sarah's muffled scream. Then Brenda walked out, straightened her hair, looked directly into the camera with a smirk that would chill a gargoyle, and walked away. I turned my head slowly to look at Brenda Miller. The queen of the county was suddenly very, very pale. "Well, Mrs. Miller," I said, my voice like a gavel strike, "that's a very interesting lunch you had at the country club. I didn't know they served assault with a side of entitlement on the menu." Brenda Miller was staring at the screen like she'd just seen a ghost. Actually, it was worse than a ghost. It was the truth. And for a woman like her, the truth is far more terrifying than any spirit, Her mouth was hanging open just enough for me to see the expensive dental work, but no words were coming out. The queen of the county had lost her crown, and it was rolling across my courtroom floor. Well, I leaned forward, my elbows on the bench, staring her down. "I'm waiting, Mrs. Miller. Was that your twin sister? Do you have a malevolent doppelganger who shops at the same boutiques and carries the same Hermes bag? Or was that you entering Miss Jenkins' apartment with a stolen key?" Brenda's throat hitched. She looked at her lawyer, a man who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and stay there, and then back at me. "Judge, that video was taken out of context. I went there to talk to her." I was concerned about her mental state. Concerned? I barked a laugh that had zero humor in it. "You didn't knock. You used a key. You don't talk to someone by breaking into their home like a cat burglar in a Chanel suit." And that sound, that sharp crack followed by a scream, was that you concerning her into a bruised face? "She was hysterical," Brenda shouted, her voice shrill. The mask was finally off. She started screaming at me, accusing Marcus of things. "I just tried to calm her down." "By hitting her?" I slammed my hand on the bench. "Don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. Lady, you slapped a pregnant woman so hard the audio picked it up from the hallway. You didn't try to calm her down. You tried to break her. You thought because your husband wears a badge and a title, you could walk into this girl's life and treat her like a piece of trash you found on your shoe." I turned my attention to the sergeant's report. "Now, let's talk about Sergeant Vance. Bird, get the chief of police on the phone. Not his office, his personal cell. I want him to know exactly what his administrative assistant has been up to." "Your Honor, Brenda's lawyer finally found his voice. Is that really necessary? This is a civil matter. It's a criminal matter that was buried by a corrupt department, and I'm going to unearth it right now." I snapped. "Sit down, counselor. You're lucky I don't have you held in contempt for filing a countersuit based on a blatant lie. You knew she wasn't at a country club. Or if you didn't know, you're incompetent. Pick one." The lawyer sat, fast. I looked back at Sarah. She was crying quietly, her hand protectively over her stomach. "Miss Jenkins, did Sergeant Vance even look at your doorbell camera when he arrived?" "No, Your Honor," Sarah sobbed. "I told him I had video. He told me that digital evidence is easily faked, and that if I tried to submit a doctored video to smear the chief's wife, he'd have me charged with a felony. He told me to be a smart girl and just move back to whatever town I came from." The room went dead silent. That's the kind of thing that makes my blood boil. It's one thing for a private citizen to be a bully. It's another for a man in a uniform to use the power of the state to silence a victim. It's disgusting. It's un-American. And it wasn't going to happen in my house. "Bird, did you get him?" "He's on the line," Judge Bird said, handing me the handset. I didn't hold back. "Chief Miller, this is Judge Judith Shaindlin." "Yes, that Judge Judy. I'm currently sitting in judgment of your wife, Brenda. You might want to listen closely, because your career is currently dangling by a very thin, very frayed thread. Your wife just got caught on video committing a home invasion and an assault on your deceased son's fiancé. And your Sergeant Vance? He's currently on the hook for filing a false police report and witness intimidation. If I were you, I'd get down to your precinct and start cleaning house before the state attorney does it for you. We're done." I hung up the phone and looked at Brenda. She looked like she was going to faint. Her husband was her power source, and I had just unplugged him. "Now, back to you, Mrs. Miller," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You claimed in your sworn statement that you were at the country club with the mayor's wife. That is perjury. That is a crime. You lied to this court. You lied to the police. And you did it all to avoid taking responsibility for putting your hands on a woman who was carrying your grandchild. Your own flesh and blood." "She's not one of us," Brenda spat, the venom finally pouring out. "She's a nobody. Marcus had a life planned out. He was going to marry a senator's daughter. He was going to be someone, and then he met her in some dingy diner, and he threw it all away. That baby isn't a blessing, Judge. It's a mistake that ruined my son's memory. I stared at her for a long beat. I've seen some cold people in my time. I've seen murderers who had more heart than this woman. To her, people weren't human beings. They were accessories to her social status. Her son was a trophy, and Sarah was a dent in the gold plating. You are a very small, very bitter woman, I said, and you're about to have a very expensive afternoon. You're suing for harassment? Dismissed with prejudice. You're suing for defamation? Dismissed. You don't get to sue someone for telling the truth about what a bully you are. I turned to Sarah. Miss Jenkins, I'm awarding you the full $5,000. It's the maximum I can give you here. But believe me, if I could give you $50,000 out of her personal bank account, I would. But we're not finished. I looked at the court reporter. I want a full transcript of these proceedings sent to the district attorney's office. I want a formal complaint filed against Sergeant Vance. And I want a protective order issued for Miss Jenkins against Brenda Miller and any member of the Miller family, effective immediately. Brenda started to protest. You can't do... Shush! I yelled, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I'm speaking! You haven't had anyone tell you no in 20 years, have you, Brenda? Well, today is your lucky day. No, you don't get to talk. You don't get to bully. You don't get to pretend you're better than the woman sitting across from you. In fact, right now, you're a lot lower. You're a defendant who just got caught lying under oath. I leaned over the bench, looking her right in the eye. You think you're protecting your son's legacy? Your son loved this woman. He wanted to spend his life with her. He wanted to raise a child with her. The only person tarnishing Marcus Miller's legacy is the woman who gave him birth. If he could see you right now, he'd be ashamed to call you mother. Brenda flinched as if I'd slapped her. Good. I wanted it to sting. I wanted it to leave a mark that no amount of country club martinis could dull. Bird, escort Mrs. Miller out of my courtroom. I'm tired of looking at her, I said, waving my hand as if I was shooing a fly. Wait, Sarah said, her voice small. I stopped and looked at her. She had wiped her eyes and was standing up straighter. Judge, can I say one thing to her? I nodded. Go ahead. Sarah looked at Brenda. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just a profound, weary pity. I loved Marcus. I loved him when he had nothing, and I loved him when he was stressed about school. I have his letters, Brenda. I have the ones he wrote me where he said he was scared to tell you about the baby because he knew you'd try to destroy me. He knew exactly who you were. He didn't stay with me despite who I was. He stayed with me to get away from who you are. The silence that followed was heavy. Brenda Miller didn't have a comeback. For the first time in her life, she had been stripped bare. No title, no money, no husband's badge could hide the fact that she was a hollow, cruel person. Get her out of here, I said quietly. Bird took Brenda by the arm. She didn't fight him. She walked out like a ghost, her lawyer trailing behind her like a kicked dog. I turned back to Sarah. Miss Jenkins, come here. She walked up to the bench. I softened my voice, something I don't do often. You're going to be a mother soon. You need to be strong. Don't let people like that get under your skin. You have the truth, and you have that baby. That's more than she'll ever have. Do you understand me? Yes, Your Honor, she whispered. Thank you. Don't thank me. You had the courage to keep that video. You're smarter than they gave you credit for. Now go home, take a nap, and stay away from the Millers. If they so much as breathe in your direction, you call my clerk. I'll make sure the next time Brenda Miller sees a judge, it's through a set of bars. I watched her walk out, her head held high. It was a small victory in a world that can be very ugly, but it was a victory nonetheless. Next case, I yelled, but inside I was already thinking about that, Sergeant. I wasn't done with this town yet, not by a long shot. When people use the law as a weapon, I make it my business to disarm them, and I usually enjoy the process. I looked at the next file. A dispute over a dog. Simple, clean, no corrupt police chiefs. But my mind kept drifting back to that video. The way Brenda Miller looked into the camera, she thought she was untouchable. People always think they're untouchable until they meet me. All right, Bird, I muttered, straightening my collar. Let's see who else thinks the rules don't apply to them today. The afternoon went by in a blur of small-town dramas and petty grievances, but the tension from the Miller case lingered in the air. I could tell the gallery was buzzing. Word travels fast in a place like this. And by now, the Queen being dethroned was the talk of every break room in the city. By the time I reached my chambers for a break, my phone was already blinking. It was the district attorney. He'd heard the Chief Miller recording. "Judy," he said when I picked up, "you really stirred the hornet's nest on this one." "The nest needed stirring," I told him. "It's infested with rot. Are you going to do your job, or do I have to come down there and do it for you?" "We're opening an investigation into Vance and the chief's involvement in the Miller report," he assured me. "The video you provided is damning." "It's not damning, Bill. It's a funeral for a career. Make sure you bury it deep." I hung up. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. But as I sat there, sipping my tea, I knew the story wasn't over. Brenda Miller wasn't the type to go down without a fight. And a wounded animal is always the most dangerous. I looked at the clock. There was still 3 hours of court left. "Bird," I called out, "get the next group in here. I'm losing my patience, and I haven't even had lunch yet." I walked back onto that bench after lunch, and the atmosphere in the room had shifted from curious to radioactive. The gallery was packed now. Word had clearly gotten out that the local royalty was being dismantled piece by piece. I took my seat, smoothed out my robe, and looked at Bird. He gave me a subtle nod. He's been with me forever. He knows when my blood is up, and he knows exactly how much baloney I'm willing to tolerate. Today, the limit was 0. I didn't even have a chance to call the next case before the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a heavy, self-important thud. In walked Chief David Miller. He was in full dress uniform, the gold stars on his shoulders catching the light, his chest puffed out like a prize rooster. He didn't walk, he marched. He thought the uniform would act as a force field. He thought that if he looked like the law, I'd treat him like an equal. "Mistake number 1. Chief Miller," I said, my voice flat and unimpressed. "I didn't wait for him to reach the front. You're late, and you're out of uniform for this venue." He stopped at the bar, his hand resting instinctively on his belt. "Excuse me, Judge, I'm the Chief of Police." "And I'm the Queen of Sheba," I snapped. "In this room, you are a witness and a husband. That uniform doesn't give you a lick of authority here. In fact, wearing it to a civil hearing regarding your wife's assault on a victim is a pathetic attempt at intimidation. Bird, find the chief a seat in the back row. He can wait his turn like everybody else. I have a department to run," Judge Sheenlan Miller said, his voice dropping into that low, authoritative tone he probably used to cow rookies. "I'm here to clear up this misunderstanding regarding my wife and my sergeant." "There is no misunderstanding, Chief. There is a video, there is a victim with a bruised face, and there is a sergeant who apparently thinks his job is to act as your wife's personal janitor, cleaning up her messes." I leaned over the bench, staring him down. "You want to clear things up? You can start by explaining why Sergeant Vance told a pregnant woman that digital evidence is easily faked before threatening her with a felony charge." Miller's jaw tightened. He looked at Brenda, who was sitting at the defense table looking like she just found a savior. Then he looked at me. "Vance is a decorated officer. He has discretion when it comes to... Discretion is for deciding whether to give a warning for a broken taillight, not for covering up a home invasion." I slammed my hand down. The sound made him jump. "Good. Don't you dare come into my courtroom and lecture me on discretion. Your officer bullied a victim to protect your wife's reputation. That's not discretion, Chief. That's a conspiracy. It's a crime. And if you authorized it, you're a co-conspirator." "That's a serious accusation," Judge Miller said, his face turning a deep, angry shade of red. "I'm a serious woman," I shot back. "Now, sit down. Before I have Bird put you in a cell for contempt, I'm not finished with your wife." Miller sat. He didn't go to the back row, but he sat in the front, steaming. I turned my gaze back to Brenda Miller. She had regained a little bit of her arrogance now that her husband was in the room. She actually had the nerve to look at Sarah Jenkins and smirk. Mrs. Miller, I said, drawing her attention back to the firing line. Your husband's presence doesn't change the fact that you are a liar. You stood there and told me, under oath, that you were at a country club. We have video of you at the plaintiff's apartment. That is perjury. Do you know what the penalty for perjury is in this state? Brenda's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my client was confused about the timeline. Confused? I looked at the lawyer as if he had two heads. She gave me a specific location and a specific person she was with. That's not a timeline issue, counselor. That's a making up a story to cover my tracks issue. Sit down. You're making it worse. I looked back at Brenda. Let's talk about the key. How did you get a key to Miss Jenkins' apartment? Brenda cleared her throat. It was Marcus's key. It was in his personal effects that the police department returned to us after the accident. I paused. I let that sink in. I looked at Chief Miller, then back at Brenda. So let me get this straight. Your son dies. The police department, which your husband runs, collects his belongings. Instead of giving those belongings to his legal next of kin or his fiancée who shared his home, the department gives them to you. And you then use a key from those effects to break into the woman's home to assault her? She wasn't his next of kin. They weren't married, Brenda yelled. She was his partner. They lived together, I yelled back. And more importantly, it wasn't your house. You had no right to that key, and you certainly had no right to use it. That's called burglary, Brenda. Breaking and entering with the intent to commit a crime, the crime being the assault you committed once you got inside. I looked at the chief. Chief Miller, did you personally hand your wife that key? Miller stood up again, his face now pale. I don't recall the specific chain of custody for my son's items, Judge. You don't recall? I mocked him. You're the chief of police. You deal with chain of custody every day of your life. You knew exactly what you were doing. You gave your wife the tool to harass this girl. And then you sent your lapdog sergeant to make sure the girl couldn't complain. It's a nice little family business you've got going on, isn't it? Judge, this is a family tragedy, Miller pleaded, trying a different tactic. We lost our only son. We're grieving. Grief is not a license to be a thug, I shouted. Grief doesn't give you the right to hit a pregnant woman. If anything, you should be cherishing that girl, because she's the only thing left in this world that carries a piece of your son. But instead, you treated her like an enemy because she didn't fit into your social circle. You're not grieving, Chief. You're ego tripping. You're so worried about what the mayor or the senator will think about a waitress joining your family that you forgot how to be a human being. I looked at Sarah. She was watching the chief with a look of pure heartbreak. Miss Jenkins, I said, did you ever try to return the items to them? I asked for them, Your Honor, Sarah said. I asked for Marcus's watch and his laptop. They had our photos on them. The sergeant told me they were evidence and couldn't be released. Then I saw Brenda wearing Marcus's watch at the grocery store a week later. I felt a chill go down my spine. This wasn't just a case of a slap. This was a systematic attempt to erase a woman from her own life. Bird, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, call the state attorney's office. Tell them I have a chief of police and his wife in my courtroom, and I believe there is enough evidence for a grand jury to look into charges of burglary, assault, perjury, and tampering with evidence. You can't do that, Brenda shrieked, standing up. David, do something. I'm doing something, Brenda, I said, my eyes locking onto hers. I'm showing you what happens when you run into a judge who doesn't work for your husband. You've had your way for a long time. You've looked down your nose at people like Sarah because you thought you were above them. Well, look at where you are now. You're a defendant. You're a liar. And you're likely going to be a felon. I turned to the chief. And you're a disgrace to that uniform. You used your power to protect a bully and silence a victim. You're not a lawman. You're a coward in a costume. The chief looked like he wanted to say something, but he looked at the gallery, he looked at the cameras, and he looked at the sheer cold fury in my eyes. He realized he had no moves left. He sat down and put his head in his hands. I'm not done, I said. We're going to talk about the defamation suit you filed, Brenda. You claimed Sarah was extorting you. Tell me, what did she ask for? She asked for money, Brenda snapped. She said she needed help with medical bills and the baby. That's not extortion, you moron. That's a mother asking for help for her child, I screamed. Extortion is when you threaten to reveal a secret unless someone pays you.